Hey guys, and welcome back to Reading with Mo. So today, ignore slightly a little bit messy background, I just can't be bothered, but I really want to talk to you guys about how my reading month went for the month of October. I know it's a little bit late for an October wrap up, but I wanted to definitely talk to you guys about them. So yeah, it's a little bit late, like I mentioned, the first 2 weeks of October I feel like were super great. I read so many books. I was just like killing it as far as reading. And then the last 2 weeks you definitely took a turn. So I don't think I even read any books in the last 2 weeks of the month, but I still have a lot of books to talk to you guys from the first half of the month when things were going well. So let's go ahead and talk about those books. And I don't even have them on me right now. I'm just going to be showing you guys the covers of them. Most of them I don't even have physical copies of anyway. I think there's only like 3 books I read last month that I actually have physical copies of, so it's fine, it's whatever, we're just gonna go with it. You know what, I decided not to be super lazy and I grabbed the 3 books I actually do have physical copies of to share with you guys. So, oh wait, there's actually one more. But crazily enough, I have like 13 things that I still want to talk to you guys about. So we have a lot to catch up on for as far as October reading goes. So as far as book series went, I went ahead and completed the 3rd book in Robin Hobb's Rainwild Chronicles quartet. I'm currently reading the 4th one right now. I gave this one 4 stars, I believe. This is a fantasy series I've talked about a lot on my channel. Don't really feel like I need to go too much into it now that I'm so deep into this series. I am enjoying it, but like definitely the Rainwild Chronicles in general, not my favorite as far as the whole realm of the Elderlings world, but I am getting through them so that I can definitely get the most out of reading the next and final, I think, series in this whole world. So yeah, City of Dragons, finished that one. I also read Jane Eyre. So last month for October I lightly participated in Victober and I chose to read as a Victorian literature book Jane Eyre, finally, by Charlotte Bronte. This is one of the most well-known classics, especially in the Victorian era, and I finally got to it. It was it was quite a lengthy book, to say the least. This book, now I'm probably going to struggle a little bit to remember my exact thoughts now on these books like a month ago, but I know I gave it 4 stars and I really want to watch I think it's like the 2011 movie adaptation of this book. I'm glad that I finally know kind of like the gist of the story, because I feel like Jane Eyre is some book that's referenced so much in even other literature, and I always was like curious as to what the book was about and stuff. So we're following Jane and her life, pretty much it's like a coming of age story as she starts off pretty young, being in a situation growing up where she doesn't really have the best experience, but then we're following her as she starts off as an orphan and then going through this like reform school or something like that. It's like a charity school, and then eventually going on to become a governess. I was really hoping I was going to give this book a 5-star rating. I know for a lot of people this is one of their favorite books / classic books of all time, and while I do appreciate it and I really enjoyed it, I could see myself rereading it again in the future. I don't know, at least on this first reading, if it's one of my favorite books of all time, but definitely appreciate it, and I'm glad that I finally have read this classic. I actually have physical copies of more books than I thought I did from what I read last month, so I had to go grab this one, and it is The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. So this book was on my most anticipated books for the year, and when I'm so glad to say that I did not put off reading this book. It's just, I think, one of those reading the right book at the right time things. I gave this book 5 stars. It's one of my favorite books of the year, possibly one of my favorite books of all time. I really enjoyed my time reading this book. I actually listened to it on audiobook, and immediately after I finished it, I went to one of my local indie bookstores, Capital Books if you guys are in Sacramento, and they had a copy there. I was able to buy a physical copy because I loved it so much. I wanted to have a physical copy for my shelves, and because I do plan on rereading this book again in the future, so I wanted to make sure I had a copy for myself. So what's the book about? This is a book, it's historical fiction. So this book takes place in Florence in the 1550s. Our main character that we're following is Lucrezia de Medici, which is actually based off of a real in-person history person here. Well, we don't know too much information about her, but this novel is based on her true story. and she is the third daughter of the Grand Duke, but she ends up having to, at the beginning of the novel, we're following her and she's married to the Duke of Ferrara or something like that. And at the beginning, we're following in her head her thinking that her husband is about to kill her, and then we go from there. So it starts off very tense, and it goes very much back and forth in the timeline from that moment with her husband back into like how she got here, her childhood, her upbringing, her becoming who she was, then getting herself into this situation, what were the circumstances of that. I really enjoyed this book so much. It very much prompted me to go ahead and pick up another book by Maggie O'Farrell that I've had on my shelves for forever, and that's Hamnet. I started that one in October, but I did not finish it until November, so I'll save my thoughts on that one for my November wrap up. But yeah, Maggie O'Farrell, she is a great author, and I'm going to be picking up more books from her in the future for sure. Next, we have a couple books I wanted to mention briefly. They were books that were sent to me for review. I received art copies of. So the first one was The Kingdoms of Savannah by George Dawes Green, and the other one, these are both from Celadon Books actually, was Black Skinhead, Reflections on Blackness in Our Political Future by Brandy Collins Dexter. While these are both from the same publisher, they're both very different types of books. So we'll talk about The Kingdom of Savannah first, which I ended up giving 3 stars to. This book came out in July, so I was actually able to get an audiobook from my library to listen and follow along as I actually read it. And I think the book was okay. It just didn't really stand out too much for me. It's not very memorable, not really something I would highly recommend to you guys. It takes place in Savannah. We're following this kind of local mystery. There's this guy who was murdered, and it kind of has to do with this big like conspiracy in the town. We're following multiple different characters and people, and altogether like I was just very underwhelmed, so I don't really want to dwell on this one too much because honestly it was a little bit boring. And then the other one was Black Skinhead, which I did enjoy more. I gave this one 4 stars. It's a nonfiction book, and we're following Brandy, who is the former senior campaign manager for Color of Change. This book is described as an outward look at Black votership, electoral politics, also a funny, deeply personal, introspective look at the fragility of Black culture and identity, ultimately revealing a Black America that has become deeply disillusioned with the failed promises of its country. I thought this book was very interesting and definitely educated me on a lot of things that I was not too familiar with before. As someone who doesn't really keep up with a lot of things as far as politics go, this book was very educational for me. The parts of the book that I did enjoy the most were where Brandy is reflecting on different things growing up that she experienced and some of the like back history of her own family and stuff. Those parts were my favorite. We can go ahead and okay, let's take a brief pause from the books that I did finish and go into the ones that I did not finish before. So those are all the books I have to show you physical copies of. So as far as the books that I read that I did not finish, I ended up DNFing during the month. I think there were 3 of them if I'm counting correctly. The first one was The Rule of 3 by E.G. Scott. I ended up giving this book a rating of 1 star because I actually did get a good I think I'm more than halfway into this book, and it was so unbelievably boring, and I could not get myself to continue on, and that's really hard for a mystery thriller book. Part of me wanted to push through just to know what the ending was going to be, but I feel like I had gotten to the point where my mind had just checked out so many times. We're just following way too many perspectives. So this takes place in this private community. We're following 3 women as well as their 3 husbands who are all involved in this scandal that happens, or like as things are going on, when I guess they have this weekly game night or something, the men and the women separately, and somebody ends up dead, and it goes from there. And it seems like such an interesting premise, but to be done so boringly and terribly. And like I feel like I'm not the only one in the reviews. Like a lot of people are underwhelmed by this or DNF'd this book, and sadly this was one of my anticipated books that for whatever month this book came out in, but you know, I just wasn't going to put myself through it. So I did not finish that one, even though I was mildly curious to know what the ending was. I think I actually did just skip to the end and like listen to the epilogue or something, and yeah, it wasn't worth my time really. The second one I DNF'd was also another, both of the other 2 actually are also books I had put on my most anticipated of the year, but there's honestly so many I put on there. I know there's no way I'm going to read all of them, so I don't feel as bad to put something down if I'm not really enjoying it as much, especially when I get them from my library and there's like, it's not like I spent any money on them. Okay, the second one I want to talk to you guys about was The Birdcatcher by Gail Jones. Now this one I think I only read the first like 20 or so pages. It was very short. I think the ebook was only like 100 pages or something, and I still couldn't push myself to do it. So I read one other Gail Jones book before. It was Corregidora, and I know there's a lot of people who really love her and what she's done for Black women authors, and I can appreciate that, but also at the same time realize I just don't know if her writing is for me. So I have one other book on my shelves by her that I'm gonna still give a try because I've bought it already, but if I don't really enjoy that one, then I think I'm just not gonna really read any other Gail Jones books. I can't really tell you too much about what this one is about because I barely started it, but I was already just like not interested in it. So this one is set on the island of Ibiza. The story is narrated by the writer Amanda Wordlaw, whose closest friend, a gifted sculptor named Catherine Sugar, is repeatedly institutionalized for trying to kill a husband who never leaves her. So again, a premise that sounds so interesting, but then just the execution just did nothing for me. Okay, then the other one that I DNF'd was The Enigma of Room 622 by Hoel Dicker. I got the audiobook for this, and while I was on my flight to Oregon in October, I decided to listen to this, and so I think I listened to it for about an hour, and I was just really bored. I didn't really care. This is another mystery thrillerish book that sounds like it should be interesting. It like takes place, I really like the setting. It's in Switzerland in this like remote lodge. It's like kind of bougie, and there's this room that there's a mystery around, and I liked that. But then it started going into all this other random stuff that I'm sure would have eventually connected with the story, but I just didn't find myself being interested in the other parts it was going into. It had something to do with like crime in the country or like some political people or something, and I just found myself so bored. So I was like, I'm not going to continue with this. And then there's 4 other books that I'm going to be sharing with you guys. So I'll show you the covers over here because I don't have physical copies of them. I checked them out from my library. So the first one is How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water. And this is written by Angie Cruz, who also is the author of Dominicana, which I read a few years ago and really enjoyed as well. I gave this book 4 stars. As far as like the audio production and the audiobook narrator, because I did listen to this on audiobook, 5 stars. Like, she was perfect for this role of it just kind of sounded like you were listening to someone's auntie, like telling you their story and stuff. It just was really a really well done audiobook for sure. So we're following Cara Romero, who she thought she was going to work at this factory for the rest of her life, but she ends up getting laid off, and she's in her mid-50s when she loses her job in the Great Recession. So she's being forced to go back on the job market for the first time in decades, and things have definitely changed since she first entered the whole job scene. So she's being set up with this job counselor to help her be able to find work, and she has 12 sessions, which make up the 12 chapters of the book, with this counselor, and it's her speaking with her. And even though the whole point of these meetings is for her to be able to get a new job, we end up getting like her whole life story and stuff that's going on currently with her life, and it's just a really cute, wholesome book, and I enjoyed it so much. While I didn't quite reach like a 5-star read for me, something's holding me back from being at 5 stars, but I really did enjoy it, and I would recommend it to you guys. And then I lied to you guys, I actually have 5 books that I've been meaning to talk to you guys about. So next one was Bliss Montage, which actually was a DNF. I forgot to mention it as well. And this was a sad DNF because this was one I was really anticipating. It's a short story collection by Ling Ma, who is also the author of Severance. I gave this one 2 stars. I read, I can't remember exactly how much of it I read at this point, but I know I read at least a few of the stories. I don't think I ended up reading all of them because after a few, I was just like, yeah, this short story collection isn't for me. I was bored, not really too interested in it. So with this book, it just was really not doing anything for me. I did not want to force myself to continue something I wasn't enjoying, so I DNF'd it. Next, we have another audiobook that I listened to, and that was The Attic Child by Lola J. This one I ended up giving 4 stars, and I really enjoyed this one. We're following 2 parallel storylines. One of them takes place in the early 1900s, and the second one takes place in 1974. But they both parallel each other in that they're taking place in the same setting, and each following a child who is really going through a tough time. So in our first storyline in London, we're following Celestine, who he's 12 years old when he's taken away from his homeland in Africa and taken to London, and he spends most of his time locked away in this large house in the attic by this large attic in the house by the sea. During this time, it's really hard to read from him in that he misses his home so much. He just, as a kid, as a child, reading from that perspective, just wanting to be back with his family and being in this environment and not understanding what's going on and stuff and why he can't go back home is just, that part was so heartbreaking. And so then we're following in 1974 Laura, who is a young orphan who was born into wealth, but whose circumstances change and also finds herself being confined to this attic, the same one that Celestine was in the 1900s. While she's up there, she ends up finding underneath the floorboards these items that end up connecting her story to Celestine's story, and as it goes on, as she's investigating and trying to figure out the secrets of this attic and the past that connects them both, we find out a lot about both of their families' past and history and how they're connected. I really enjoyed that. I feel like some parts were a little bit too convenient and like a little bit too circumstantially parallel to each other. But other than that, I really enjoyed the book. And like I said, I gave it 4 stars, and I would definitely be open to reading another book by this author. Next, we have a mystery, and this one's kind of described as like a medical mystery, which I haven't read anything like that before. And I definitely would put it into the medical mystery category. And that is Sometimes People Die by Simon Stevenson. So I got the ebook from this for my library, and we are following in this like psychological thriller this young doctor. He is returning to his practice after being disciplined for stealing opioids from his previous job, and he's struggling basically at this St. Luke's hospital in London, where they basically just accept him because they're so desperate for staff. They're understaffed. And it seems after he's been working there for a while that too many patients are dying under his watch while he's there at this hospital. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it a 4-star rating. I've never, like I said, really read a medical book like that before, where there's actually a lot of medical and science terms that are thrown in there but explained to you too, so you know what's going on and stuff. But I never really have read anything with that much medical terminology in it, but I enjoyed it. If this is something that sounds a little bit interesting to you guys, I definitely would recommend you guys to pick it up. I will definitely keep an eye out for more books published by Simon Stevenson too in the future as well. And then on to the final book that I read, or I should say listened to, in the month of October was The Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson. So this book I ended up giving a 4-star rating to, but similar to How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water, I would give the audiobook itself, like the production of the audiobook, 5 stars. I think the audiobook really was what made this book more memorable and enjoyable to me. I think if I had just read it physically, I probably wouldn't have liked it as much. But with this book, we are, and also with the audiobook, it is like a full cast, and it has like a whole podcast element and different things that really make it seem so much more interactive as an audiobook, which I loved. This book is actually a retelling of Stephen King's Carrie, but told by Tiffany D. Jackson, putting her own spin on it. So it takes place at this high school in Georgia. We're following a biracial teenager as she's attending the first integrated prom. So I have not read Carrie before, so while I am familiar with the general like story and what goes on, I didn't know a lot of the details of the story. Maybe if I had, then it would have affected more so my enjoyment of the book, because I would have been like thinking about the original source material more so than just like enjoying this book for what it was. And I really did enjoy this book. I gave it 4 stars. I don't really read a lot of young adult books anymore, and especially like in the mystery, but if I do, they do typically tend to be in like the mystery thriller genre or like some hard-hitting book or something. Our main character, Maddie, she is an outcast at her school. She's been bullied, and I feel like in the beginning of the book I was a little confused because their high school doesn't have an integrated prom, but it's set during modern time and like people have cell phones and stuff. So that all was like very confusing to me. But Maddie, the people at her school don't know that she's black. She has been white passing her whole life. And we get into the backstory of stuff with her dad and very, very toxic relationship, as well as like just the bullying and stuff that she deals with at school. Overall, like I said, I pretty enjoyed this book. There was just a few things that kind of kept it from being a 5-star rating for me, but for a young adult book, I really enjoyed it. I already had a pretty strong feeling that I was gonna like the book anyway though, because I do love Tiffany D. Jackson's writing, and she's just like one of those young adult authors that's still an auto buy or auto listen for me, so I'm glad that she didn't disappoint. So those are all of the books I wanted to talk to you about that I got to in the month of October. Let me know how you guys' reading month went for October, and I'm hoping that I will have a better reading month in November, because I DNF'd like 4 or 5 things last month and I wasn't really getting a lot of good ratings, but I'm just really glad that I did get a 5-star read last month with The Marriage Portrait. This book is what really like redeemed the whole month for me, so I'm hoping that, you know, things are on the up and up for November. And that's it for this video. I'll see you guys next time. Don't forget to do all that good stuff, like, comment, subscribe. I appreciate it so much, and I'll see you soon. Bye.